Welcome to Business Owner Tales from the Trenches, the podcast for business owners who want to see around corners and thrive financially. Your host is Carr, CEO and business owner at CornerCap. Tune in every other week for lessons learned from the trenches of entrepreneurship, business successes, and financial independence. Here's Cannon.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. We are excited to bring to you today a really interesting story. If you're someone who has been in the corporate world and is ultimately looking to become an entrepreneur or start your own business, this is a wonderful account today of what those first 3 or 4 years will look like. And it will both reassure you and inspire you as you listen to it. So we're excited to get into it. But Claudia, why don't you tell us a little bit about our guest today?
Today, we have Leslie Jordan on the podcast, the founder of Vitaminis, which was founded during the pandemic, where she brought her business to life as a corporate side hustle and then decided to pursue it full time. Vitaminis' mission is to get your nutritional needs met in an easy, fun, and guilt-free way. They are currently found on Amazon, Walmart Marketplace, and across 80 stores in the Midwest.
It's a really great story, and you'll hear how Leslie has achieved a lot in the first 3 or 4 years, all the way to having now 2 products that are viable, retail distribution, but it took a lot of hard work getting there. And if you, as you listen in to this story, you'll hear a little bit about, she talks about something she called the risk aversion dance before she got fully dedicated to what she was doing. And it's just remarkable to hear her talk about gaining that confidence. She talked a little bit about the balance between hope and money, how it's important to always have at least one of those, hope or money, in the process. And she talks a lot about how she did her rounds of funding from complete startup, just her and her husband funding it at first, and then taking it into various stages and different rounds, and then what's likely to come next. And as you listen to her talk about what the biggest adjustment for her was in leaving the corporate world, and why being fully dedicated to it is finally what made the difference. But in both those cases, it's not what you would expect, right? It's not about the passion, although that's important. The full dedication opened up opportunities, and it was more than the passion that took it off. And then finally, just what to expect in those 3 or 4 years. Such a great real-time account. And in particular, if you are trying to get into the consumer retail market, listen to how she cracked that code, because it's not easy, right? So it's a great episode. We appreciate Leslie joining us on it, and sit back and listen to Leslie's account of how she got Vitaminis up and running. Well, Leslie, thanks for being on the program. I'm excited to explore how you are starting a business at this early stage and all the thrills and chills involved with that. And I know it's been great success. But I thought first we would just start. Did you always want to be an entrepreneur?
I do think it started early. I don't think I necessarily knew what an entrepreneur was, but my mom tells me this story when I was, I think, 6 or 7. I drew a little story about a princess, and then I asked her to borrow money so I could make copies of it. And then I started to sell it on the corner outside of the Ace Hardware downtown. And I think I made like $1 or something. So I think about that story. I'm like, yeah, I guess it did start pretty soon. And then in college, I was part of an entrepreneurial group. It was called the Chicago Entrepreneurial Group. It's actually where I met my husband. And it was all about like wanting to be an entrepreneur and all that. So, I mean, that was when I was like 18, 19. So I guess I probably have always wanted to.
Yeah. Well, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But then I know you started in a corporate career, and did you go into that thinking this will lead to being an entrepreneur at some point? And how did your corporate career prepare you for what you are doing now?
Yeah, I do think in the early stages of my career, it was like this development mentality. Like, I'm going to develop all these skills in order to go do something else, which is sort of interesting to think about, because at some point you wake up and you're like, this is the life, like there's no something else at some point. I mean, clearly when you're 22, it's different. But that was kind of my thought. I was like, I'm going to work in finance because it's going to teach me all these finance skills for someday. And then I'm going to get an MBA to learn all these things for someday. And then I'm going to be a consultant because I'll get to see lots of businesses doing lots of things for someday. And then I'm going to work in corporate in these different roles, marketing, sales, and rotate around to learn something for someday. And I think at some point I kind of was like coming up against like, okay, I've been doing this for like 15 years. What is the someday? And like, maybe you should do that soon. But yeah, I think there was always this mentality of like preparing myself as opposed to like, I never really felt like I was doing what I was meant to do in those roles.
Right. So you knew you were building towards something and there was a calling, but you were waiting for that calling to call you, I guess, right?
Yes, I
And
guess so.
so
Yeah.
take us to that moment. When did you realize Vitaminis was going to be the calling?
Well, that's a long process. And
Hmm.
I mean, honestly, there's some days today that I'm like, is this really, is this really going to work out?
Yeah.
But, at some point in my corporate career, I was still thinking like, hey, I don't think it was so explicit, like I should go do something, but I started writing down ideas of businesses that other people should start. We saw a lot of research coming in around clean label, functional food, better for you, which really resonated with me from a personal standpoint, because that's how I live and manage my nutrition. But I
Right.
was working in the alcohol industry, and so we weren't going to do
Hmm.
anything with that kind of information. So I just started like filing it away, but it wasn't so explicit of like, here's some things I'm going to do someday. It was more just like ideas. Um, Fast forward to the pandemic, I ended up getting laid off from my hospitality job because the company shut down during the pandemic. And so that sort of presented the opportunity to do something different. I was in a different environment. I was out of my routine. But even then, I was job searching. Like I just jumped straight into job searching as almost like a default. But after a while, no one was hiring. It was literally like the heart of the pandemic, like starting in March of 2020. I started tinkering more with my idea. It was like, okay, I'm not working, no one's hiring, so maybe I can tinker with these ideas that I had. But even then, it was like, well, I'm just tinkering. I can still go back to work. It was like I wasn't like fully committed to it. And that went
Yeah.
on for quite a while. I actually went back to work in a corporate job for 6 months in 2022 for
Oh,
the
wow.
first
Okay.
2022. So that I had got
Yeah.
the business off the ground. It was going, but it wasn't like really going. And so I was like, well, I can make this a side gig and go back to work and use the money to fund the business. And so that went on. Then that job ended up ending for that company also had issues and had to do layoffs. So I was out again. And I think that was the moment where I thought, okay, I've seen somebody else's business face challenges and have to do layoffs and everything. And I'm working hard on someone else's dream. I have my own thing over here. And it was like this moment of, I can continue this sort of like risk aversion dance of like, oh, I'm just going to do this thing on the side, but actually I'm going to do this other thing. But I was like, you know what? I've done this cycle a couple times. If I don't fully apply myself to this idea, it will never be anything. Like I had this moment of like, this, if I don't try at least for a time. And it's funny, after I left that job, I fully dedicated myself to Vitaminis for 6 months,
Mhm.
and it went leaps and bounds. Like I got into retail for the first time, everything started picking up. And I look back and I'm like, that's pretty obvious, right? Like apply yourself and stuff happens. But I didn't
Yeah.
make that connection right away.
That's so interesting. So your passion kind of brought you into Vitaminis because I think, I know nutrition is something that was, I think, personally important to you. And at the same time, it's not like you had some research that you're like, maybe we'll use this, maybe we don't. But the pandemic allowed you to bring that together and explore it. And at first, it sounded like a little bit like a hobby for you then, right? Because you were thinking, I'm still going to
Kind
go
of.
back and get the corporate job. How did and you've already kind of given us the answer. The hobby, yeah, make it a hobby, but it's not going to really grow as a business yet. Did you, as a hobby, what did it look like? Just 30 seconds
Yeah.
on that. Was it just like a couple products or some samples? What did you do?
Yeah. So, I mean, a product like Vitaminis, because
Yeah,
it's the nature of it, it's not something you can just make in your kitchen. Because I think a lot of entrepreneurs start out, it's like the proverbial, like made in my kitchen, and then everybody loved it and it became a business. Like you
yeah,
can't really do that with a product like this. Like you have to produce it in a co-packer that costs money, and there's like volumes involved. So I would say the hobby part of it started originally with doing my own research around the idea. And so I'd seen some of the research from my corporate background, but kind of digging more into the trends, thinking about what I wanted for my nutrition and my health, and looking out there in the market. Is it out there? And then once I started to have the concept for Vitaminis from that thinking, I interviewed probably 50 friends and family. So I actually typed up an interview guide, and it was like formal questions like, what are some challenges you face in your nutrition? Like, what are some things you look for in the market that you don't see? And I actually interviewed people, and even if it was my friend where we might just chit chat all the time, it's like, no, I'm going to interview you. I'm going to take notes. So that was the first step, and that didn't cost anything. And so that I would still put that in the hobby side of things.
Right.
And then when I finally got all that feedback, I had this idea. It had been somewhat validated by people I'd talked to. Then it was like, okay, now this is going to cost some money to do. And that's where I had a conversation with my husband, and we just decided, like, what will it cost? And can we do it in a small enough investment where if it doesn't work out, that's okay. So I
Yeah.
think that was really key, is like breaking it down into these small steps where it's like, okay, I'm just going to put a little bit of money to get a formulator to see if we can make a formula that will do this, and then go from there. And then it was like, once we had the formula, I was like, okay, I'm gonna see if I can find a co-packer who will make a small batch and just see if it's possible to make it, and see if people will even think about drinking it. That's like a small thing. So it was like
And
these tiny steps.
yeah, and so that was kind of, what was that, late the second half of 2020 and first half of 21, basically, or
Yeah,
2021?
2020 was like the idea.
Yeah.
2021 was like, the first half of 2021 was actually putting the little bit of money and getting the formulator. And it took me about a half a year to get the product made. So July
Okay.
of 2021 is when we first sold our first product.
Right. And who bought it? Just friends and family, or did you actually?
Somewhat. I offered samples to friends and family. So I gave
Yeah.
out a lot of samples because I did have to produce a certain amount. There was a lot of it. And a lot of them, not a lot. Some of them were like, this is great, I'm going to buy it. Some of
Yeah.
them were like, this is not for me. Some of them were like, I don't know if this is going to work. So I got like a whole range out of there. And I think I
Good.
had to realize that friends and family are not necessarily a target market. Like, there might
Yeah.
be some target market in there. But it's funny because some people that started subscriptions back then are still on subscriptions for like
Yeah.
years now. So for some people, it really resonated. But yeah, it started with that. Then after that friends and family testing, I really launched into sampling because
Mhm.
everything was online. I wasn't in retail. So I would research events nearby. So for example, like in the summertime, there were like these outdoor yoga classes. So I would bring a cooler full of Vitaminis and just give them out and direct people to the website, like, try this. And that has been a learning process. Like, what is the right sampling that actually gets people to convert at the lowest cost? Like, that's been a learning curve that I continue to refine.
Yeah.
But that's how I got my first customers, just giving away product and trying to find people that liked it.
Well, so at some point you realized, all right, so you've got a concept that has some interest and you hadn't fully committed to it. Then fast forward to when you did commit to it, and you said in that first 6 months, things went better than you expected.
Yeah.
Tell us just a little bit about that. Why? Was it because of preparation? Was it because of luck? Was it just the stars aligned? How did that come about so fast?
I think this is so important because if I really am being honest, the reason things went well in that 6 months is because I was fully dedicated to it. And I have so many stories of that time period where I wake up in the morning and it's like, okay, the whole day's ahead of me. What am I going to do? And it forces you to get creative. It forces you to take that one next step on, maybe you got rejected 3 or 4 times by this retailer, but what's one more step I can take to go visit the local store or try a different angle with this manager or whatever. The only reason I did all those next level things is because I was dedicated to it. Because if I was working, it was like I would do the bare minimum. I'd apply to the retailer, I'd send out the stuff, and then I go to work. And that's it. And what I've realized now is, like, putting yourself in a position where you will continue to try. That's critical, because there have been 1,000 times on this journey that I could have said, oh, it's not working.
Yeah.
That investor told me it's not going to work. It's not going to work. This person said that, gave me a bad review. Product doesn't work. This is a dumb idea. Like, there's so many
Right.
things.
And you
But
did
when you
encounter that,
dedicate,
right?
yeah, you keep trying.
You did encounter people saying this isn't a
Oh
good
yeah.
idea, right? And how do you work through that and stay dedicated? Because you said, right, the dedication is what's so important. How do you truly limit those distractions then and stay true to it?
It's messy. Like, there's no clean answer. I mean, some of it honestly is like, you don't have much of a choice. Like, once I produced thousands of products, some people said they didn't like it. I don't have a choice. I still have to get through thousands of products. So some of it
Yeah.
is truly like, okay, I'm just going to try to get through this product and see. Um, some of it is, at a certain point, I had invested money and time. I heard once with entrepreneurs, it's like you either have hope or money. You know, if you have both, great. If you have one or the other, you can keep going. And if you don't have either hope or money, then you're done. And so there
Right.
were many times where it's like, okay, I've already invested the money and I'm not really feeling very optimistic, but I'm just going to keep going because like I can't just walk away from this thing.
Yeah.
And then there are other times where I really didn't have the money and I knew things were going well, so I could go ask for, you know, an angel investment or something. So it's a balance. And the other thing I'll say is a lot of feedback I got was good feedback. And I actually did change my formula. I've changed my packaging. I've adjusted my target market. I've made a lot of changes based on the feedback. So it is this balance of like, you don't want to completely block it out, but you also don't want to let it derail you.
Right. Well, that mindset's so important, and thank you for sharing that. So, like how sometimes you feel like you got it, and sometimes you don't, right? And you just have to work through that. When you did finally start to see some product building, did you have an end game in mind for your business? Or if not, because some entrepreneurs say, and we often teach, kind of have an idea where ultimately what success looks like. So how did you, what does success look like from where you sit today? Where do you want this to go? And if it's not the end game itself, what is that milestone you're working toward now?
Yeah, and that is an ongoing process.
Yeah.
I think there's some different levels of goals. One is like the business has to be self-sustaining. Like I realize that now, and I think looking around at all these startups that are shutting down because they raised a bunch of money and they couldn't raise in this environment. I don't want to be in that position. So like goal number one is get this business to be sustainable, which means reaching a certain amount of scale, having profitable margins, and being able to kind of fuel the demand at the right cost. So in a business like this, I mean, these bottles are a couple dollars, a few dollars, right? So you
Yeah.
got to sell a lot of these to support a business. So for me, that's retail expansion. Like for me to get to a profitable e-commerce business would be very expensive to acquire all those customers, but retail expansion can really help with that footprint and kind of get that scale quickly. And then retail and e-commerce kind of work together once you get the scale. So that's
Hmm.
number one is like scale to profitability.
Hmm.
And that also means like staying lean. Like I'm the only full-time employee. And I think that I can get this thing to profitability myself with various contractors and outsourcing. So that's the first part. But then beyond that, I really think there's an untapped market out there for people that want to do better with their nutrition, but they can't take pills, or they're uninspired, they're intimidated by supplements, or they want something fun. And for that reason, I want the business to get big enough to reach all these people. Like, where are they? Are they shopping at Target? Are they, like, where are they at, like, getting to them? And I don't know where that limit is. 10 million, I think, is easily achievable with a
Hmm.
platform of shots and mini bites and bars and things like that. 10 million revenue, yes. 100 million, maybe.
Yeah.
And along those lines too, like if a company wants to acquire, like if a big CPG company wants to acquire Vitaminis and help it to get to more people,
Hmm.
great. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So some of it is like, how big do you have to be to get that attention?
Yeah, no, totally. So definitely the first milestone, I mean, you'd mentioned maybe getting acquired, and that could be, the pipe dream, but that's not really what you're building and why you're in this, right? I mean, what is the mission at the end of the day?
It's reaching the people that want the product and really offering like healthy, easy, tasty solutions to people to help them better their health. Like I truly, truly believe that what you put in your body is what you're going to get out of your energy levels, your wellness, your vitality to pursue your goals. And I think I live in this like wellness bubble, and I forget sometimes that there are a lot of people out there that don't get the nutrition they need. They're eating lots of processed foods. They're feeling lethargic and unhealthy and unmotivated. And I want to reach all those people with a product that is fun, easy, tasty, without the trade-offs, no added sugar. Like you can feel good about taking it, and it helps you to get more out of your life. Like that is truly what I want with this product.
Yeah,
However,
well,
I need to get there.
and I've tried it, and thank you. I mean, flavor is important to me, right? So the flavor's good, so that's good. But I know that I'm I'm getting some nutrition while. And tell us a little bit about what, just for 30 seconds, what the nutrition is that
Yeah.
you're introducing.
So this is the immune support product. This is the one we launched during COVID for obvious reasons. And this has as much zinc as 4 avocados, as much magnesium as 5 cups of spinach, and as much vitamin C as 3
Yep.
oranges in
Yeah.
orange pineapple juice. And those particular nutrients, zinc and magnesium in particular, are hard to get. They come from like dark leafy greens, oysters, like stuff like that. So this is meant to kind of make it easy to get those important nutrients. And then
Yeah,
this
no,
is
that's
gut
good.
health. It has as much probiotics as 2 cups of yogurt and as much fiber as a cup of broccoli in a blueberry juice with banana puree. So this one, and the gut is so important. This one is meant to kind of feed your gut ecosystem, which then regulates how well you absorb nutrients, your mood, your sleep, your hormones. You get all sorts of benefits from the gut health.
Yeah, that's great. Well, great research that you've collected through the years, and it's wrapped up into one great product. So, well, let's talk a little bit about the funding journey, because that's always, particularly entrepreneurs at the stage you're in. You know, it's bootstrapping, and yet at the same time, you see the potential for third party and outside capital. So at first, you did talk about how you and your husband said, "All right, we're going to go ahead and fund this some ourselves," right? And I think did you fund it just in that hobby stage, or did you actually commit some of your savings even when you were all in?
Um, it took a good amount of money to get it out the door. So
Yeah.
wherever that hobby stage, it's a blurry line. I think
Yeah.
there was a point where we put in a little, right? And then we saw if it worked, and we put in a little more and saw if it worked. I think there was a point there where it's like, okay, now we're going to put in to get it, manufactured or out the door or to build a website. That is next level.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at the evidence we've gathered. Do we think this has a chance? Let's look at our finances. Like if we do put in this amount of money to get it out the door, let's say it doesn't work, is that going to break us?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, those were the kinds of calculations that went through. And I'm lucky. I started this business later in my career than some people. So I did have that capital
Yeah.
to put in. But I think a lot of entrepreneurs that are earlier in their career, that's probably where you go to friends and family right away
Hmm.
to get that initial investment.
Were you comfortable as entrepreneurs think about risk in different ways than many corporate people? Was it easy for you to put your own savings at risk?
I would not say it was easy. No.
Yeah.
I mean, the initial little bit, sure. It was like, okay, this is a little bit, whatever. But then it's really tough because you don't get any you do not get any validation from anyone. Like no
Mm.
one is going to look at you and be like, yeah, this is definitely going to work. And, you know, if you were to ask your friend to give you whatever, name the amount, $50,000 to do it, they're probably gonna say no because it's risky, right? And so you have to somehow get over that hump yourself. And so, yeah, there were definitely moments where I was like, oof, I don't know. And it's kind of this balance of like, there are some moments where you see the potential and you see all the upside and you put the money in and then you might doubt it. Like a couple months
Mhm.
later, you're like, oh, why did I do that? This isn't working. And it's just a roller coaster. I
Yeah.
don't have a good answer for that, honestly.
Yeah. No, it's part of the journey, right?
Yes.
Um, but you have gotten you have had angel investors and I'll say
Yes.
third party capital, and scaling is probably going to require next level capital too on the institutional side. So,
Yes.
how have you tapped your networks to start bringing in that external capital?
Yes. I realized, I think I saw a framework once about networks where it was like the inner circle. There's like there's like the inner circle, which is like your immediate family. And then there's like the next circle of like close friends, and it goes out like that.
Yeah.
And in the early stages of a startup, a lot of what people are investing in is you. Like are you going to have the grit? Are you going to be able to wake up in the morning and keep going? Are you going to have the stamina? You know what I mean? And it's less about, I'm realizing now too, it's less about like, do you have the resume? It's like, no, do you have like the mental fortitude? And so that's kind of how the fundraising has gone, right? Because in the beginning, it's going to be that close circle of people that really know you and believe that you can do it just based on you without any data and any validation or whatever. And then the next circle, so I did fundraise from some people that I would put like as like really close, and probably my husband is in that bucket too, right?
Oh yeah.
And then the next circle, which angel investors I brought in, they have a little bit more like a professional context. And that's where it gets a little bit to like, okay, does Leslie have like the background to do this? But also they know me pretty well. So it might be somebody that I went to business school with. My 15-year reunion is this year. So someone I went to business school with has seen me out there doing stuff for 15 years. That's kind of a long time. So it's like,
Yeah.
so that's how the circles have gone. And I have not yet brought in institutional capital, but I do now have some angel investors that I don't know personally that have that I've met through this process. But if you look at their background, they do kind of understand what it takes from like what kind of person can be successful, but they're also looking at the data that we've gathered so far. And so I imagine at some point I'll have enough data and validation to go to a third party to write a check that doesn't know me from anyone else, but they can just see the information. But it's a
Yeah.
process.
Yeah, that's great. So, as you think about, you're making a lot of decisions, right? How, tell us a little bit about the team of advisors you've either built formally or you just kind of tap informally.
Yeah, I have quite a group and it's very informal at this point. One really important group for me is other entrepreneurs. I leverage that all the time. And I'm in a couple of networking groups of one of them is called Startup CPG. I think there's like thousands of founders in the Slack group and
Yeah.
you can just throw questions out, meet people. I get introduced to other founders a lot. Someone will say, oh, you know, my friend started a whatever cereal company and you're in consumer products, like you guys should talk. Every time I talk to these people, I learn something, and it could be something tactical, or it could be like just hearing the things that they struggle with and realizing, oh, that is part of the journey. I'm not like just because I'm struggling doesn't mean Vitaminis is a terrible idea. It might just be that's part of the journey. So that's been huge. Like other entrepreneurs is huge because it's almost like they're like your team because you don't have a team.
Mhm.
I do leverage the expertise of my people that I work with on the business. So if somebody is, you know, someone's managing my email marketing, I am for sure not telling them exactly what to do. I'm like, well, what works? You know, what do you think? Like, what works in your experience? And that is important because I think as a solo entrepreneur, at least for me, my tendency is to direct everything. But you have to realize that if you're not drawing from experts in different areas, you're not getting the best thinking everywhere. So it's kind of like basic management in any job.
Yeah.
And then I do tap like what I would call like more mentor type people from my corporate career um or you know past work experience, and they also have advice for me, and they tend to ask questions, right? They'll ask questions that make me think, or they might like push on something that makes me think a little bit more about, oh, you know, maybe I could improve that or something like
Yeah.
that. So it's a pretty broad range.
Yeah, no, great. Well, it's important to realize you're not an island, right? I think a lot of entrepreneurs sometimes wake up and they're like, I've got to make these decisions, and how do I structure it? And without external advice,
Oh, and I
you can
left
go
out a
right.
really important category, the
Yeah,
customers.
yeah,
Customers. I read every review, and I learn something from every review. It's like if you hear the same theme a couple times, it's probably a theme that you should pay attention to. So there's negative feedback in reviews. There's also I've gotten requests for products from my customers. In fact, my third shot that I'm producing this year is called Daily Greens. That came from customers. And
Oh,
that
wow. Okay.
is basically the same idea of like a green juice shot with vitamins that come from green vegetables like A, D, C, folate, whatever. So that is such an important group, right? Is like, why do you guys like vitamins? What would you change about it? If somebody like drops their subscription, I always follow up with them. Why'd you drop
Mhm.
your subscription? Like, what?
Yeah.
Tell me. So
Well,
that's a
I'm
huge
curious. I
important.
mean, do you feel like the formula is where you want it to be, and now it's a marketing fit question, or is there still adjustments to the formula that feedback helps you with?
I think the formula could be refined, but it's kind of like an asymptotic curve, if you will
Yeah,
excuse my like nerdiness. But like, you know, it's like in the beginning, I was making big adjustments. Now we're like in the refinement stage where like, yeah,
yeah,
I could probably tweak things a little bit, but I'm not hearing massive messages of big points of feedback from people
hmm,
anymore on these two products that are pretty established.
yeah.
Um, but when I launch Daily Greens, I'm sure that'll be the same process of like getting the feedback and refining it.
Yeah, yeah. Does it require endorsements from the medical community, or is it a different set of regulations there?
That has come up from investors in particular.
Yeah,
So my philosophy and what I'm leaning on to date is the ingredients in Vitaminis are well documented. So like, what does zinc do for you? What does magnesium do for you? Like, what are the benefits of fiber and probiotics? There's like white papers galore. And so for me, it's like putting those components into my product. I can leverage the research behind those components. There is a point where it might make sense to invest in a study about the product itself, but those are very expensive. But you
yeah,
can, you know, do tests with groups of people and document the benefits that they received. You can have doctors, get involved in giving their opinions, but it's just very expensive. So I'm kind of leaning on that third party
Yeah.
validation, and also looking at reviews and testimonials just anecdotally to see that people are finding benefit from it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting too, as a consumer, I now realize a lot of the white papers that you see out there, you got to be careful because sometimes they're funded by those companies. So just because you read a white paper, some article that said XYZ was going to change your life, just be aware that XYZ probably paid for that.
Yeah. No, exactly. Got conflicts of interest all over the place. You got to be aware,
Right.
right? Well, I'm curious, maybe two more questions. I mean, this is just hearing the journey that you're taking is just so helpful. It's going to be helpful for people who are at that stage of just about to leave the corporate career and jump into something, right? What has been the biggest retail challenge for you? Because you'd mentioned, I heard you say, you'd been turned down by a retailer 3 or 4 times, but you kept going back to them. What have you found to get that shelf space? What has been the biggest
Yes.
retail challenge?
So there's 2 parts of the challenge. First is getting the shelf space, and I'll talk about that. But then the other part is like, once you get in there, you have got to make it successful, because
Yeah.
getting in is so challenging, especially my phase. I'm in 2 retail chains right now. So I have some data and it's somewhat proven, but it's not a no-brainer for a bigger retail to accept us. So, you know, getting getting in the door in the first place, the most powerful way to get in the door is with data and showing that it's successful. So the
Mhm.
last thing you want is to get into a retail chain and then move on to something else, and then it just kind of languishes. And now you don't have the data. You're probably going to get kicked out of that retailer, and you've wasted that opportunity. Um, so one of the retailers I'm in right now, that was quite a journey. I applied at headquarters. I got rejected. They said, we really want to see more proof before we let you in. So then I kind of like networked to see who I knew there, whatever, see if he would give me a second chance. He's like, listen, I can't undo that decision. Sorry. So then it was one of these days I woke up and I was like, what do I do now? So I just got in my car and I went to the local store for that chain. And I just talked to the manager, showed him the product. I probably went back there 6 or 7 times. I would just
Yeah.
go there, do my grocery shopping and like, oh, hey, manager, remember me? And finally he's like, okay, yeah, we can give it a chance in this store. So once it was in that one store, it was like sampling, making sure it's visible, making sure it's in stock, getting feedback. Like, I was in that store and it did well. And then I asked that manager if he would recommend it to a few of his local colleagues, and he did. He sent an email, but then I had to follow up because, of course, no one's going to get an email and immediately do anything. So I had to go to those
Exactly.
stores, and this was like a months and months process. And finally, I was in 11 stores and it was doing well. And headquarters reached out to me and said, hey, we pulled a report on brands that are really growing and yours popped on it. So I think the moral of that story is it's like this grit and try again, but also really getting into the store is the first step. That's when the work begins. And I'm still really, really focused on keeping those velocities up. And that's a combination of sampling, making sure it's in stock, which now I'm working through a distributor, because if
Yep.
it's not in stock, it's not selling. Making sure it's in the right place in the store and it has visibility, and is there anything I can do to get it a little bit more eye level? Or it is a lot of work. And that is something I learned in my corporate career. Getting velocities up was a ton of effort.
Mhm.
Um, so not to be downplayed.
Yeah. And you're still basically, like you said, you're the sole employee. What do you think is your next hire? Either to add to your skill set or just handle some of the work?
Yeah, and we have a lot of part-time
Yeah.
help. So for example, I have someone who helps do sampling. That's critical.
Yeah.
But I think if I were to think about scaling my time, I could really use somebody on sales and marketing more broadly. I think I still have to be the face of sales, but there's a lot of effort, as that story just illustrated. There's a lot of effort to even get the conversation, finding out who the right person is, reaching out, trying to get their attention. You know, it's just a process. And then on the marketing side of things, once you're in that retailer, which store should we be sampling at? What kind of
Yep.
sampling should we do? Setting up the samplings, that's just a lot of logistics. So that's an area that I think I could leverage my time a little bit as we get bigger.
Yeah, awesome. Well, maybe last question. What is just in this journey you've had so far, what has been the best advice, kind of that undiscovered advice you didn't see that coming that you've gotten from somebody that you remember the most?
Oh, I don't know. That's really tough.
Yeah.
I think it was probably I've been told to take breaks, don't quit. Like if you feel like you want to quit, just take a break. I think that's really good advice. Honestly, I think that's just good advice for life
Yeah.
because you will reach difficult times, you will burn out, whatever. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to quit or fail completely. Like you can just take a day off, take a week off.
Hmm.
It's your business. Take 2 weeks off if you want to.
Yeah.
Or just like go for a walk outside. So I think that was really good advice that I use quite a bit.
Hmm.
And sometimes it even means if I'm feeling really burned out on topic A, just shift to topic B for a while. And what I found is not only do I not give up, but I often can come back to that issue with like just a fresh perspective, new ideas, more positivity, and then it can solve itself. So I
Yeah.
think that's like probably the one piece of advice I can think of.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Breaks are so key. So, and maybe as part of that, as you came from the corporate world where you're surrounded by resources and activity, then you go to your own basement or living room and building the business and you're by yourself. And I know you've got some advisors. Is that a hard shift to make where you are alone when you're used to people around helping you
Yeah.
make decisions?
It's hard in a different way than you'd expect or than I
Yeah.
expected. I expected it would be hard because you have to work hard, like you have to do more things. And that's not the hard part. That is also true, but that's
Hmm.
not the hard part. Um, I think the hard part is sort of a mental thing. And it is, you're not going to have all the answers, but you can figure it out. And when you're in a corporate structure with a lot of resources and experts, you're kind of like, oh, I don't know anything about that. I'm going to ask so and so, or like, oh, so and so said to do it, so I'm just going to do it. Like you almost are like in this bubble of like you're just in your little box and you don't have to kind of take risks or responsibility for things outside of your control.
Yeah.
Um, it is hard to step into something you've never done and do it. And it's a balance because you don't want to be reckless, like, oh, I have no idea how to formulate a product, so I'm just going to mix some stuff and sell it. Like, no, you need expertise, but to have the confidence that you can figure it out, you can reach out to somebody, you can get there. That is the hard part. That is
Yeah.
the hard part. It's like when to reach out, doing that outreach, and knowing that you will eventually get to a solution.
Yeah. Well, I love that positive mindset. Where you've stepped off the place where there's tons of resources, and now it's you're on your own, and you got to figure things out. And like you said, taking breaks and positive mindset. That's kind of the key. Well, if
Yeah.
people learn more about Vitaminis, what is the best way for them to do it?
Come to our website. That's my favorite place to see people, vitaminisbrand.com. You can read all about our products, drop your email. We send out blog posts. We have a great blog with recipes or education, like, did you know magnesium helps you sleep? Like stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, so that's my favorite place for people to come. But we're also on your favorite online retailers. We're on Amazon and Walmart Marketplace as of a couple weeks ago. So if that's where you shop, great. We're there. You might have to search for Vitaminis and add a couple more keywords because sometimes if you just put Vitaminis, you get directed to vitamin brands, other vitamin brands.
Ah, okay.
We're on in person. If you're in the Midwest, we are at Fresh Time Farmers Market and the Fruitful Yield, about 80 locations here in the Midwest.
Great.
And we are also on social media. So TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook at Vitaminis brand. I think that's all the places we are.
Yeah. Well, that people should be able to find you with that. So, well, Leslie, first of all, congratulations on being able to take a hobby and turn it into a first start viable business. And salute and hats off for embracing the challenges as you scale. I'd love for us to stay abreast of the story, and I'm so glad you've been able to join us and share that what it looks like to get that business off the ground, which you've done so well today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Leslie. Welcome back to the studio. Claudia and Cannon here with you. Claudia, always an interesting episode. We
Yep.
learned so much from different entrepreneurs at different stages. And here we really got to hear someone who brings a lot of experience to what she's doing to start her business
Mhm.
and what that first 3 to 4 years looks like, she really slowed it down in
Yeah.
a way. Really, you got to really hear that detailed playbook.
Mhm.
A lot of entrepreneurs after 7 or 10 years kind of gloss over,
Right.
just some key stories of those first couple of years. But first, one thing she mentioned, and I thought we'd start off with, is she said her business didn't really accelerate until she dedicated herself fully to it. And yet it wasn't just about passion. What did you think?
Yeah, I know. I thought it was really interesting how she talks about that it really was the time, she wasn't just doing the bare minimum in order to get by and still have a business, but she was
Yeah.
able to be scrappy and be dedicated into getting her products into stores and figuring out different solutions and really taking the time to be creative of how she went about it.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, it was about having now time.
Mm-hmm.
She couldn't just do the bare minimum and blow stuff off. She was suddenly looking at a full day ahead, and she's like, I got to be creative and start
Right.
figuring out how to do it. And it gave her, I think, some focus and some maybe some tenacity, right?
Mhm.
And I thought it was interesting because most of the
Yeah.
time people say, oh, you got to have the passion. Well, she clearly got the passion. But
Right.
it was certainly more than that. So I thought that was kind of cool. Also, here in this episode, this was all about, again, one of those successful entrepreneurs who leaves a successful corporate gig that they've done for 5 years, 10 years, or in Leslie's case, 15 years. And that brings a lot of experience for them,
Yeah.
right? It accelerates, their judgment, their experience, their kind of their sense of timing. But one thing it just underscored again, that's underappreciated, is the concept of liquidity.
Mm-hmm.
When you come from the corporate world, you often have other sources of financial assets that you can put back into the business, but you can also use for yourself to keep yourself and your family afloat while you are growing the business. So, that concept of liquidity is underappreciated. But there are a couple of things she said were kind of her biggest adjustments from the corporate world, right? When people leave the corporate world, they're used to resources and activity going
Right.
on, right? And then they go into kind of the quiet basement by themselves. What did you think were some of the adjustments she highlighted?
I mean, one of the biggest ones I think she talked about was being accountable for things that you can't control.
Yeah.
In corporate, you very much are held accountable for your team and your responsibilities, and everything's kind of outlined for you.
Yeah.
And when you're an entrepreneur, everything is your responsibility, and so you have to be accountable for everything. And then, she also talks about having that confidence within yourself to know that what you're doing is the right path for you. And I thought that was really interesting for her to talk about as well.
Yeah. So heads up, if you're leaving the corporate world, you're not going to have extra resources, but
Mhm.
get used to that concept of being accountable for something you can't control that are often unknowns, and developing the confidence that, yeah, I'll figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was cool. Lastly, just a couple points. She did give that play-by-play of what those first 3 to 4 years look like,
Mhm.
and she's made a lot of progress. 2 established products. She's in multiple states now. Several retail outlets in terms of distribution. Some real success to celebrate. So just awesome there. I thought we'd just focus on 2 things. One, on the funding side. Every entrepreneur goes through those stages of funding. Hers was no different, but listen to her talk about just those expanding circles. It started first with her own money, and she talked about how no one measures, no one reassures you that this is going to work, right? You're just kind of all in with your family members to focus on it. Then she expanded to raise money from friends and family who were investing in their belief in her, right? And it's more about her grit, not about proving that the model works. And again, there's no data to validate this for people, but once you start building a story and validating that your product is working, then you can expand to other angel investors. And she's now moving into that phase,
right?
With where track record is starting to matter. And you can see what's coming next, right? Getting that funding truly from more institutional sources they're not going to so much invest in you because you are who you are. They're going to invest in your track record, in your resume, and what the model can represent. So she's growing into that, but she's ready for it, right? She's naturally headed that way. The other thing, and here, share your thoughts here. I mean, she did a really interesting job of talking about how to crack into the retail market.
She did. She talks about going to headquarters first and trying to push Vitaminis there. And they said, no, we need to see more of a track record and more proof.
Yeah,
Exactly. And so she took it local and she went to a store in her area and just kept going back and visiting and would only go grocery shopping there. And every time would check with the general manager. And eventually she was able to get her product there and then had him recommend her product product to be in other stores in the area. And then headquarters contacted her and said, your product has been one of the fastest growing ones. And so they wanted to put it in more. And that just shows like the grit and determination that it takes. And sometimes, yeah, you have to scale down and think on a smaller thing first before you can expand into all of those stores,
Yeah. No, it's so cool hearing her talk about that. And it gives you confidence, right?
Mhm.
Because you're like, if I'm struggling with it, it's not because I'm crazy, right?
Right.
I mean, it's like, this is what it's required. So now in closing, it's always interesting as entrepreneurs who are founders and in that startup early years, as they move from survival to product establishment, they need to move from working in the business to more working on the business. And we spent several episodes in the past
Right.
highlighting that. And it's such an important part of your journey. There's no magic formula, but to go from working in, to working on means ultimately hiring one or two people, right?
Mhm.
And she touched on that in this show. I mean, ultimately getting someone who can help her manage shelf space, manage inventory, manage just ongoing relationships
Mhm.
with existing salespeople, so distribution outlets, so that she can expand her sales scope, right?
Yep.
And free up to do more of that to drive growth. I mean, that's so key. Or in proving out the economic model, right? She's
Mhm.
still getting that product fit, right? And she's, at least with the two top products, no longer really tweaking those formulas, but she's got other products that are developing too. So scaling those and refining the others.
Right.
So all those are key on, and then of course, continued funding. So
Mhm.
that's a natural progression that is coming down the pike for her over the next 18 months. But it's so cool to just drop right into the middle of
It
her
is.
first 3 or 4 years, see where she is, see how she's doing it. And we really appreciate her taking the time to
Mhm.
highlight that. So we hope you enjoyed the episode, and we will look forward to seeing you on the next one.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Are you looking for more resources to help your business? Visit cornercappodcast.com for our free ebooks to help you plan for inevitable transitions in your business. Tune back in every other week for a new episode.